There's a video available due to the astounding genius of our times on YouTube by Wolfgang Kohler on I think it's something like Kohler, Wolfgang. It shouldn't be that hard to find, on chimpanzees and their insights, which these studies were mentioned in Dilthey, which Heidegger read and knew of. I think that there's something in that speaks to Heidegger's attitude about equipment, and that I mean, the usual attitude is kind of this uh, funny appeal to this notion that because somebody made something, they understand it, and therefore um, the technique or art, all the things that were not like trees or vines which produce their fruit naturally, but which had to have. I mean, if you read Hegel, all this sort of the death of nature, that which comes from itself, and the birth of this what is invested through the spirit, which already has death, as it were, pregnant within itself, and all sorts of considerations about what culture is in contradistinction to physis, that which comes forward by itself. I think Heidegger's point is that we're no longer dealing with physis, not in any of the senses that are now topical in current discussions, but rather, I mean, not in anything like the geological age of the how is it called? Anthropocene, or however it's called. The humans are making more impact on what's happening globally than are the shifts in the tectonic plates, or however they understand that. But it's not in any of those senses. It's much more like what Heidegger says concerning yin and yang, for instance, in the earliest Chinese thinking, where yin and yang correspond to night and day, coldness and warmth, and so forth. Um, the most natural clock. I think he goes into this in this essay on time, where he mentions also some his criticisms of and praise of Henri Bergson's investigations into time, and the idea of the elasticity of the I guess he doesn't call it the subjective, but this picture of time as a piece of a rubber band forever expanding out. But Heidegger's sense of time, the Weiling, is not at all like any other sense of time that's ever been thought by human beings. And in this sense, when he says it's as though we made the mistake of thinking day and night were the first clock, but rather human beings always had the nothing available to us. Time was always not prior to, but time was not, that's not the principal uh, meaning of time. That's because being and time are the same. You could say the title "Being in Time" means being as time. In other words, the way of being is time. And I think, in a way, what that means is that the content of all things is the real time. So these apes in the Wolfgang Kohler example, they discover things that are new. They have this so-called aha experience. This phrase, which is variously attributed to all and sundry, every polymath and great thinker who ever lived, it seems, is, including Wolfgang Kohler, has been cited as the originator of this phrase, aha experience. Um, they suddenly realize they have something, a piece of equipment, as it were. Did they make it? Do they understand it? No. How can you say that the ape really understands what it's made? No, it's more like when Moses says to himself, "Let me turn aside and see what this great thing is." Something befalls one, the equipment befalls us. So there's all kinds of equipment that goes back far beyond any human conceptions, memories, understanding. So this Vico concept, which actually Strauss said is largely misunderstood, because Strauss went back and read Vico closely and concluded that what Vico really meant was much more modest than what's generally attributed to him by people who are into social engineering, as Hayek calls it, into the notion that through our rationality we can understand society and then therefore rebuild it to our specifications. Um, I would say it's almost clear that that's just absurd, because um, something that's been made up, like civilization, over the course of millennia can't possibly be understood by any one individual. It's not like a watchmaker who knows sort of what kind of gears he wants for his watch and understands it in that sense, which seems to be the sense Vico meant. Like a good craftsman knows um, what kind of materials they want to use and what they can do with this kind of wood, and that they're making a musical instrument or whatnot, and all kinds of things like that. But to say that, I mean, the other way around, you could say we didn't. It's not really that we made civilization, we human beings. No, it's kind of befallen us, just as um, over the thousands of years. To say that it was made incrementally, as though it had been made very deliberately, as though it had been made by a plan and therefore it was understood, is doesn't seem to make any sense. That can only be so with something that's like a one-off. Like I'm going to make a ring. I'm a craftsman. I understand what I'm doing. Uh, the bevy is going to be like this. The stone needs to be this sort. The metal needs to be as so. I mean, that's a complete act. Nobody creates all the great things in a complete act, and more so probably the coming upon of language, which is maybe for Heidegger the pith of the human being. Um, this is not something that was invented in the way that a craftsman says, I'm one day, one afternoon on a Tuesday decides, well, I'm going to uh, make a beautiful tapestry, and this is going to be the theme. That doesn't seem cogent. But at the same time, there is a suddenness. Maybe it does befall one in a sudden moment, just as with as if one sees these chimpanzees discovering a tool. They're thinking about something. It's kind of storming in their mind, and then the tool comes to them. But this coming into being of time, and I'll say it that way. You see what I'm saying? The discovery of the tool, of the equipment, is really a bursting into being of a certain kind of wiling. I would say even the wiling extends to um, what, from the perspective of Platonic um, philosophy of available kinds of things, which extends even to Nietzsche, the kinds of things Nietzsche says. He's his own kind. He's not just is. In other words, he's not what Strauss calls man as man. He's his own kind. He is, according to his historical peculiarity, his personality, his particular powers and magic, as it were. Um, so this. At least I would say is a little net that catches a theme, but it doesn't fulfill the promise of showing more closely how wiling is to be thought, how one is to switch over from the measurability of something, or on the other hand, the availability of something as a question of its purpose, into this originary sort of primal sense of how things just dawn upon us and then constitute uh, time as being, as the way of being. So, in other words, that something is a specific thing is the way of time, then. A tree is a different modulation of time than uh, a house, an orchard, a different modulation of time than a desert, and so forth. It doesn't have to just be equipment, but whatever is there. There could be all kinds of complications which we can't reach, which if we were only to lay them out as a doctrine, we wouldn't get to. We would want to get to the real sense of the play of it so that we don't need the doctrine almost. The doctrine would just be something for the people who didn't do but taught, um, if that makes sense. Um, so I'll end with the one last reflection, which is Simmel, who Strauss mentions made the most far-reaching and profuse um, statements without any clamor, without announcing them as going against thousands of years of thinking, um, said something which is more or less analogous to, and possibly consciously analogous, maybe even probably, to the famous saying of Augustine about knowing what time is perfectly well until we try to state it or until we try to clarify it to someone else. Simmel said, we know perfectly well what we mean by egotism until we try to state it scientifically. That somehow has something to do with this um, whole formation of the subject and the object, as so far as the subject goes with the ego. I'll leave it at that. And again, we should try to get something which gives us more to directly enter into, but still catching these things in a sort of thematic, it's as though they could be, just as Heidegger and the sunlight that he lived in it can't really warm us properly today because those motives are no longer our motives in this Nietzschean sense. That's probably true, but nonetheless, there's something there, even in the text, Heidegger, even in what's sort of dead and not directly connected to a living motive of somebody who allowed them to issue forth. There's still something whereby that justifies Heidegger's pointing to the verses about the stepping back and bowing to the one who would come in 1,000 years. So even I think that even if we in some way show just even if not the sharpest outline of the region or the register we're trying to get to, even if we vaguely show it, it can still provide a road that would be there, and someone else could, from that point, arrive at the next inception.